This is CBC Vancouver News.
How did high-risk offender Randall Hopley disappear?
You know, there's a huge HR issue happening out there. We see it in our hospitals. It's the same with corrections and the parole board. Do we have individuals who are properly trained to assess risk?
Where the system failed and who's to blame? Plus, boycotting Air India. The RCMP say an investigation is underway into what they call threats against the airline. And the much-anticipated return of the Stanley Park Christmas train is met with frustration.
The queue allowed us in, and we still were not able to select any time, any date, any category.
After tickets sold out before many people could get their hands on them. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janella Hamilton. Significant rainfall and strong winds has knocked out power to more than 25,000 homes across the province right now. BC Hydro says the hardest hit areas are Delta, Langley, Surrey, and the Sunshine Coast. As of 10 minutes ago, nearly 3,000 customers were affected in Delta, 5,900 across Surrey and Langley, 5,700 on the Sunshine Coast, and more than 6,500 on northern Vancouver Island, and about 3,300 on South Vancouver Island. Environment Canada issued winter storm warnings for the Coquihalla Highway, and due to the potential of mud and debris flows, parts of Highway 1 in the Fraser Canyon will be closed overnight until about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The closure stretches from Boothroyd north of Boston Bar up to Lytton. The storm prompted the cancellation of all BC Ferries sailings between the mainland and Vancouver Island tonight. The minor routes saw some additional cancellations. If you're trying to catch a ferry this weekend, it's best to check the BC Ferries website before heading to the terminal. It's been nearly 1 week since high-risk offender Randall Hopley disappeared from his Vancouver halfway house. The VPD has released new pictures of Hopley taken the day he left on November 4th. Police say he is likely traveling on foot. He'll be using cash to make purchases. He's also known to frequent dollar stores, sewing supply stores, and Walmarts. VPD suspects he will be making attempts to change his appearance and hide his face when in the public. Now, there's been plenty of blame thrown around between politicians and within the criminal justice system. So our John Hernandez took a closer look at who exactly was responsible for watching Hopley and where the system may have failed.
How does a man with an extensive criminal background who is supposed to be under intense supervision disappear? Well, there's no shortage of blame.
The parole board did not place adequate controls on him.
The Premier needs to stop trying to blame Ottawa for every single thing. Look in the mirror.
Rather than jail, he got bail to a halfway house.
Legal experts say some of it's justified, but some of it's not. Randall Hopley served 6 years in prison for child abduction. He was released in 2018 and put under a court-ordered long-term supervision order. The parole board mandated conditions included staying away from kids, an ankle bracelet, and living in a halfway house.
Well, it's a bit of a nightmare for the National Parole Board, isn't it?
This former Crown prosecutor says the parole board's conditions should be scrutinized.
What type of risk was assessed, and were the proper conditions put in place for Mr. Hopley to reside in the community safely?
Hopley allegedly violated his orders last November, accused of using a computer in a library near kids. He was later arrested. Prosecutors argued he should stay in jail, but the court released him on bail. Politicians, including BC's Premier, have suggested impending bail reform legislation, or Bill C-48, could have kept him behind bars. But lawyers say that's not true. The law would only apply to those alleged to have committed a new violent act.
What Mr. Hopley is accused of having done here is breaching the conditions of his LTESO. So he's not as if he's out there and he committed a new violent offense.
So Hopley went back to this halfway house. Last week he left, cut off his ankle bracelet, and hasn't been seen since. So people are asking, should workers here have kept a closer eye on him?
Viewing the halfway house harshly, I think, is a bit premature.
This former police officer says the federally funded halfway houses shouldn't bear blame.
They are severely underfunded. They are understaffed by and large. They don't have the resources to provide the necessary supervision and rehabilitative programming.
Resourcing challenges, these lawyers say, also extend to the parole board and correctional service, which were ultimately responsible for monitoring Hopley in the community.
There's a huge HR issue happening out there. We see it in our hospitals. It's the same with corrections and the parole board. Do we have individuals who are properly trained to assess risk?
A series of failures igniting a Canada-wide search that's now in its 7th day. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
It's been a busy month for the NDP government in Victoria. They've tabled a sweeping new set of housing bills, moves they say will add supply and make things more affordable. As Emily Vance reports, those in the industry say it's a fundamental shift in how housing is approved in BC, but not every move is being welcomed.
And so we have to meet the moment. We know that there's a need for housing. We have to do things differently.
In less than 2 weeks, Minister of Housing Ravi Kahlon has rolled out several major pieces of legislation that will change how housing is approved in BC. Mandatory upzoning on single-family lots, adding density near transit infrastructure, and an overhaul of the municipal planning system. Developers say the changes will take some time, but have the potential to reduce land prices by streamlining the building approval process.
It should change the speculation on land because there's a certainty of what is available and what that land can be used for and what fees and charges the builder will pay to the municipality to get that built.
The official opposition party isn't so sure. BC United says they don't support the majority of the changes and they'll release their own housing plan before the end of the year.
The rushed nature, the lack of credible answers on a lot of basic questions leads me to believe that this is more about politics than about real good public policy.
The province says more details will roll out in the coming weeks. For municipal leaders, those details will be crucial.
Introducing legislation is the easy part. The hard part will be that implementation of these policies. And once we start the implementation, we're going to reveal the gaps that are there. And we're going to now get to know the practical challenges that were not addressed in the legislation.
Mandewo said local governments are concerned about increased strain on infrastructure, costs related to planning, and who will pay for all the extra costs. The province says they will work with local governments.
This isn't something that we just created on the back of a napkin a couple of weeks ago. This is work that's been happening for years.
Local governments have until the end of June to make large-scale changes around single-family zoning and add density around transit hubs. Emily Vance, CBC News, Victoria.
The province says more than 1 million flu vaccines have been administered to British Columbians so far this season, as well as more than 840,000 COVID vaccines.
This is the season when people come together most for holiday-related events. And this is therefore a very important time and a very important opportunity, if you have not yet been vaccinated, to get vaccinated.
The province also says COVID-19 activity appears to be waning after a recent surge, with deaths and test positivity rates declining.
COVID is leveling off in our hospitals as well. At last count, there were 244 people in BC in hospital with a positive COVID test.
However, the government cautions respiratory illness season is just getting started and says it's preparing for a possible rise in hospitalizations for all seasonal illnesses. Federal Transport Minister Pablo Rodriguez and the RCMP say an investigation is underway into what they call threats against Air India. As Chad Pawson explains, the investigation was launched after an online video urged people not to fly on the airline starting on November 19th.
Canadian authorities say they're looking into comments circulating online and social media posts. They're attributed to Gurpatwant Singh Panoon. He's a U.S.-based organizer of unofficial referendums on Sikh independence, including recent votes in Surrey. At least one video CBC News has seen does reference, quote, a danger to life involving Air India flights. Panoon says his comments have been misconstrued and edited. He maintains he's only asking for a boycott of Air India and other businesses that support the Indian government.
So while we are doing the Khalistan referendum to challenge the India's territorial integrity, we want to boycott Air India and other Indian businesses to kill their economic hegemony.
Still, the RCMP says police are collaborating with domestic and international partners and industry stakeholders. Panoon says there is no threat to Air India flights, only a protest in the form of a boycott. Chad Pawson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Move over Taylor Swift. There's a new hot ticket in town. The Stanley Park Christmas train is back in service after 2 years of repairs off the tracks. But as Yasmin Gandam reports, the excitement was short-lived after tickets sold out in a flash yesterday.
Adina Bibi and 3 of her family members signed on right away to try to get tickets for the train. But to her disappointment, none were available.
I didn't really understand what was going on. It was super important to us, so we were scrambling and trying to figure out what we could do.
Bibi says riding the train has been a holiday season tradition in her family for almost 40 years. The train has not been running since 2021, but even then, Bibi says they were all aboard for the next best thing.
But we haven't missed a year. Even those years they were closed, we actually all came together and put it up on a virtual YouTube channel and then pretended we were there.
This year, there is one Bright Nights locomotive with 3 carriages running. The original fleet consisted of 4 locomotives and 13 passenger carriages running. Pre-pandemic capacity was 560 rides an hour. This year, capacity is at 120 rides an hour. Bibi says the reduced capacity is frustrating and the website wasn't user-friendly.
If it wasn't a glitch, how were we online at the time that it opened? And the queue allowed us in, and we still were not able to select any time, any date, any category.
The Christmas train is part of Bright Nights, which is the biggest fundraiser of the year for the BC Professional Firefighters Burn Fund. Last year, when the trains were out of commission completely, their donations took a 50% hit.
One train is better than no trains that we had last year, and we're just going to continue on and, really try and make it special for anybody who we have the honor of hosting, who comes by and sees your firefighters at Stanley Park.
The event runs from November 30th to January 1st, but Bright Nights is so much more than the train. Firefighters give out candy canes, Santa will be there, and those who weren't able to snag a train ticket can still enjoy the Stanley Park lights on foot. Yasmin Gandam, CBC News, Vancouver.
After the break, we learn more about a video memorial project telling the story of Nanaimo soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice during the First and Second World Wars. Thank you for joining us for our commercial-free live stream. A 99-year-old St. John's World War I memorial is getting a makeover. And as Terry Roberts reports, it includes a new tomb for unknown soldiers.
For 99 years, the focal point of remembrance in St. John's, the Newfoundland National War Memorial, unveiled in 1924 before a crowd of thousands, when Newfoundland was a self-governing dominion, a quarter century before joining Canada. Sacred ground, lifelike bronze statues, honoring the sacrifice and courage of those who served, and those who died in large numbers at places like Beaumont-Hamel in northern France, where the 800-strong Royal Newfoundland Regiment was decimated on July 1st, 1916. But this Remembrance Day, the memorial is a construction site. A $6 million makeover is underway.
That is going to be a monumental change to the site, one that we've been looking for some time.
Renovating a century-old National Historic Site is a delicate job to preserve the artistic integrity and reverence of the memorial. At the same time, add something new, And it's something that begins far from here. Hundreds of soldiers from the Newfoundland Regiment are buried in northern France, many with no known grave. One of those soldiers will be exhumed, and after all this while, he'll come home, here to St. John's, and laid to rest in a new tomb of the unknowns at the base of the memorial. This somber homecoming will take place on July 1st, 2024, on the 100th anniversary of the first Memorial Day here so long ago.
It's going to be a very significant day.
This is the man building the tomb, just 30 years old, owner of a stone fabrication company and quarry of rare granite in central Newfoundland. The great-grandson of a man who fought in both world wars and has no known grave because he was lost at sea after his ship was torpedoed.
This is the remains of a soldier that might have fought alongside of my great-grandfather.
Few have seen the tomb. There's months of work still to do. Engravings, details, final touches. All we know is that the vault is made from this material. It's called black gabbro. Very rare, only found right here.
So this was a rock that was a potential piece for the tomb.
Here's a sketch. The vault made from the gabbro in Bishop's Falls. The cover is labradorite, making the tomb rooted in the soil of this province. Mark Brace is humbled to be part of it.
It's just like taking home Stanley Cup, I think.
Meanwhile, while the work and waiting is underway for the return of an unknown soldier, this war memorial in the heart of Old St. John's is back to its original purpose.
We are kind of going back in history, so I think it's a nice thing, and this is a beautiful, historic war memorial.
This year, the Warrant Officer and Sergeant's Memorial on Queen Street will be the site of the main remembrance ceremony on November 11th, the first time in 99 years. Terry Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
Vancouver Island University and other Nanaimo community partners are remembering local fallen soldiers through a video memorial. As Claire Palmer reports, the project acknowledges the contributions of Nanaimo soldiers in the First and Second World Wars.
A 55-minute video on loop on screens at several public locations throughout the city. It features the names of over 200 soldiers Nanaimo remembers, bringing a local perspective to the two world wars.
So I think the thing about Nanaimo that's important is the fact that, you know, we are like everybody else, and we have this shared collective identity of loss that we need to remember. Something that's this shared experience that transcends, you know, community and provincial boundaries.
The project also includes information on the fallen, including their connection to Nanaimo, to bring a human face to each name displayed, and to make them more than just a roll call of the lost and the fallen.
It's very difficult, I think, for the community to go to the cenotaph. They look at those names, they see them carved in stone, and yet, in a way, they're meaningless. They have no context by which to understand their connection to the community. So this is a way to bring those individuals back into the community.
The memorial also includes a special section on Indigenous veterans. It's based on research from the university's elder-in-resident.
They deserve the same recognition as anyone else that went through what they went through. So it's important for our younger generation to know, was that their great-grandfather, their great-great-uncle? You know, who was he?
Manson says she was inspired by a conversation she had with an elder. He revealed to her he was a veteran, something that wasn't well known. She decided it was important to research Indigenous contributions.
But everything that we hold, we're leaving behind. The legacy of who we are and who we were, right from the old ancestors to us, to carry on forward.
The project has been on display since November 1st and will continue to be displayed until Remembrance Day. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Nanaimo.
Volunteers with the Last Post Fund are aiming to ensure veterans are given a proper burial and gravestone as they work to identify soldiers in unmarked graves so their families can commemorate them. As our Ali Patargay joins a veteran and volunteer Glenn Smith at Abbotsford's Hazelwood Cemetery to learn more about the work he does.
My name is Glenn Smith. I'm a member of the Last Post Fund BC branch. I look for veterans' unmarked graves, and when I find them, I do a little bit of research, put a file together, and in due course, a headstone is approved and placed in the cemetery.
So Glenn, we're in Hazelwood Cemetery in Abbotsford, and there is a number of veterans buried here, and some of them their graves are not marked. So how do we know if you come across an unmarked grave of a veteran?
Well, what I do, Ali, is I will attend the cemetery, and as a matter of fact, this is a really good example here. There's 2 markers of veterans. 2 here, and then there's a space, then there's some more veterans markers. But in this space, I would look at that and initially think, well, that's perhaps a spot where a veteran lies and his or her grave is not marked. As this is an unmarked space in the cemetery between 2 existing military markers, my next move would be to go talk to the cemetery coordinator at Hazelmere Cemetery here and ask him if he knows if it's an unmarked grave of a veteran. And if he knows that information, I'll go with that, do some research, identify who the veteran is, put a file together, and send that information off to our national office in Montreal, where the information is vetted. I don't get to meet a lot of living descendants of veterans. World War I obviously was over 100 years ago. There aren't many World War II veterans alive today, but some of their descendants are still living. I was contacted by an elder that lives in Chilliwack. She had grown up in the Samath First Nation in Abbotsford here, and told me that her uncle, a World War II veteran, is buried in the Hillgard Cemetery, and his grave is unmarked. And she asked if I could help out and possibly get a headstone for her uncle. That one has a special place in my heart, because it is an Indigenous veteran involved, and I have been able to talk with a living descendant of that veteran. It gives me a sense of pride knowing that I've assisted a family member in having a headstone placed on their family member's unmarked grave. Giving these graves a headstone gives that veteran's identity back to those families.
Here we have a live shot of a wet and windy downtown Vancouver overlooking Burrard Inlet. Darius Madavi will join us next with a look at our full forecast.
With every bite of the chainsaw, BC comes closer to being branded as the next Brazil, the bad boy of the international environmental movement.
Really, you don't want to do that. I'm not doing it. You don't step back. This is dangerous.
In San Francisco, protesters used a giant inflatable chainsaw to get the attention of a huge customer for the BC paper industry, the phone book business. They want the people at the Yellow Pages convention to stop buying Canadian.
Greenpeace, its work in Europe, in the UK, and also in Germany, has persuaded major publishers there to commit themselves to not buy clear-cut pulp from Canada.
This is in Clackwood Sound.
It is true that clear-cutting continues not just in famous places like Clackwood Sound on Vancouver Island, but all over BC's virgin forests.
Across British Columbia, these ancient temperate rainforests continue to be clear-cut logged.
The work in the forest industry.
The BC government and the industry came to San Francisco too to say they are improving.
Clear cutting is the most common form of harvesting in BC.
Having said that, clear cutting is a practice that is evolving and going through a lot of changes.
Some BC loggers came too to remind environmentalists about jobs.
We've got people out of work all over the place.
The industry is telling customers that the changes are real. Fewer jobs, smaller clear cuts, more concern for salmon streams, and more forest off limits.
There's no evidence yet that the giant Yellow Page publishers are actually cancelling contracts for BC paper, but they are coming under tremendous pressure, and for Canada, the stakes are not merely millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. It's more like billions of dollars and thousands of jobs.
You know, in Canada, the forest products business is a $50 billion business, and because we export so much of it, we export about 80% of what we produce. We are Canada's most important earner of foreign exchange.
But the international protests about Clayoquot Sound were just the beginning. Now all of BC's immense bounty of forests is becoming famous and controversial. Terry Malewski, CBC News, San Francisco.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
On December 7th, join CBC Vancouver's Dan Burrett at the Alumni UBC webinar, Finding Joy in Climate Action. Experts will discuss what climate actions we can take that could also impact our well-being. And enjoy the seasonal celebration of quiet reflection and jubilant hope with Christmas with Corleone on December 15th, 16th, and 18th. Tickets at corleone.org.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace. To cool and clean the air in your home, call Direct Buy Furnace. Installing Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
Darius Madavi joins us now with a look at our full forecast for the weekend. What are we looking at? Are we looking at rain, sun, dare I say snow?
Yes, a little bit of everything. Most of the rain for the coast has actually fallen now. We had some extremely heavy rainfall over the last few hours. We have also had the wind warning for the Central Coast and North Island come down. This actually came down during the 6 o'clock show, in between the time it took me to walk from my desk up here on set. So if I mentioned that was up, it was actually down by the time I was up here. But a good indication of how quickly things can change, especially given the system that we have passing through. Extreme winds still expected for the inner coast until tomorrow morning. Inner south coast, until tomorrow morning. Rainfall warnings still in place, although those should come down soon because, again, most of our rain has come, although we might still see some impulses. And then another wave is coming into the end of, into Sunday night, into Monday. Then those snowfall warnings are still in place for those mountain passes and will be up for a while yet. Now, if we take a look at that wind, you can see it coming through just here in the Strait of Georgia, but a lot of it is also happening on the west coast of the island, so expect strong winds across the south coast. Then if we take a look at our precipitation, you can see that still running through, but for the most part, again, we have cleared up. We've seen the worst of it until Sunday night when we do have another system pass through, which could also bring some very heavy snowfall to the interior as well, so be ready. If we take a look at our precipitation from now compared to where we were just 6 hours ago when we were last up here, you can see that most of our rain has come for the coast because our accumulation now is quite a bit lower because of all that rainfall that we have already had. So now that system is making its way into the interior, where we will see those impacts on those roads, and that's why those mountain passes are looking a little bit dicey this weekend. So just be careful with travel. Now, if we do take a look across the province tomorrow, you can see that lingering rain, potentially some thunderstorms popping up on the coast, but we're mostly looking at impacts in the interior now, with many places experiencing at least a chance of showers, and many of them will get some rain or snow depending on the elevation. And then here, if we look at our Vancouver forecast, we do have that rain continuing potentially tomorrow morning and then starting to ease off as we get into the week. And we may even see a little break and some sunshine on Monday. So that might be a little bit nice.
Yes, something to look forward to. Thanks so much, Darius.
Thank you.
And a reminder that there are widespread power outages across the province this evening. We've just got updated numbers with more than 43,000 people across the province. That is your late news for this Friday evening. Make sure you have a safe evening. And for news at any time, visit our website, cbc.ca/BC. Have a great night.